Welcome back. You're still watching Finweek Money Matters. Well, this week's Finweek's quarterly collective insight publication takes an in-depth look at surveys, those published reports that rank funds based on their performance over a specific period of time, and they are also used by retail and institutional investors to assist them with decision making. While surveys are often used by the top-ranked managers in any given quarter as a marketing tool, they also have very many flaws. In studio to give us some guidance on how to use these surveys is Anne Cabot-Alletzhauser, head of Alexander Forbes Research Institute. And joining us from our Cape Town studio, we have Heidi Raubenheimer from the University of Stellenbosch Business School. And still with me is Finweek editor Jana Marais. Heidi, let me start with you. We often hear about these particular funds being awarded a Morningstar Award or a Raging Bull Award. How exactly are these surveys being compiled?
Well, the survey providers are actually providing a service to their clients, retail or wholesale, whoever they are, by collating information with the manager's consent. Managers have to agree to be surveyed in this way. It's obviously to their advantage more often than not. And they have to comply to certain reporting procedures, etc., etc. So that's how they're collected, not by their clients, but in fact by the survey providers.
Anna, let me come to you. Do you want to add to that?
I think it's really important that people understand this isn't just a push the button, out comes the data, boop, put it into the survey. You've got analysts that actually sit there and say, does it look right, given what we understand about these managers, that their performance is ordered the way it is? Does it look right? Does the data have integrity? Because that is really the responsibility of the survey provider, is to check whether somebody's giving you the misinformed data, whether people are gaming the surveys, a very favorite little thing to do, to kind of put something in there and you know that what you put in there will outperform everybody else because of the way it's positioned. So the survey provider has that responsibility to make sure the integrity of the information is correct. Are you comparing like to like?
Jana?
No, I think I was just going to ask, I mean, if you have to often pay to be part of these surveys. Yeah. So to what, we saw the ratings agencies like Moody's and Standard & Poor's go through quite a tough time after, the financial crisis. So how credible are these things, and can we actually believe the top-rated surveys?
I think we're on our toes, but there's certainly been some examples in the U.S. where a lot of the survey providers got caught out because they did have unit trusts that were gaming those surveys, and they eventually figured it out, brought in analysts, and corrected a lot of those problems. So there's a lot of constant reevaluation that gets done, constant checking. Have we got the right rules? Have we got the right parameters? Are we making sure that like is being compared to like?
Heidi, let me come back to you in Cape Town. There's always this notion that whenever you are looking at fund managers and how well they've done, past performance is not always an indication of future performance. Is this in fact true? As an investor, then what would be the point of having these surveys in place then?
Well, there are many questions in that question. Having the surveys in place, as Anne correctly says, is, it's providing information to the marketplace that's valuable, and the survey providers are actually analyzing and checking that data for integrity. And so that in and of itself provides you with something you wouldn't have ordinarily. Ordinarily, you'd only have your own fund manager's performance. So this gives you something extra. And the more truthful that information is, the more valid it is, and the ways that it is measured that can assist you, the more valuable the survey is. In terms of the industry's own vulnerability to that survey, that's worth considering. It's still the case that no matter how many times we say past performance doesn't lead to future performance, it's still the case that lots of funds flow out of poor survey performing funds and flow into the top ranked funds. Every quarter it happens in all the surveys around the world. And that means that the industry is vulnerable to these surveys. But I think in one of the articles you'll see, particularly Karen Smith, she's got a very nice chart there where she's actually illustrated by following that winner strategy, buying the winners, selling the losers, and repeating that strategy and over again. And she ranks that strategy amongst other funds. And what you can see is, in fact, it's stone last. in her example. And there's plenty of academic evidence on that as well, that backing the winner as a general strategy, as a general rule, is not a good strategy.
I was just going to say, ironically, it's almost the opposite, that if you back the loser, you probably have a better chance of returning than backing the winner. Isn't that right, Heidi?
Indeed.
I just wanted to, I think we had a very nice analogy in the survey, the cricket analogy.
Yeah,
and I don't know if you want to explain that to viewers.
No, go ahead.
No, I think
I
I
don't understand cricket, but I'm going to try.
Go ahead.
No, I think it was Patrice Rousseau who used the example of, you know, if you looked at the World Cup tournament, Ireland, won their first 3 games. So they had a very high ranking at the beginning of the tournament, but nobody actually expected them to win the overall thing. And the same way as you don't look at a batsman, you have to take into account the history and the batsman's score, and you can't just, based on the last 3 games, think, oh, we're going to be the new world champion. So it's quite, you have to take into account other factors as well.
But my favorite story in here is the one that Roland Rousseau uses, where he says, if you really want to be the outperforming manager, you go into a survey where they're looking for managers who have sort of 50% in equities and 50% in bonds. And then you just put 70% in equities and go off and play golf for the rest of the month. And you'll probably beat them. And that's why that like with like thing is so important, because what he's explaining is that if the risk that you have in your portfolio, in other words, by having more equities than the portfolio that's being evaluated, it will outperform, not because you're better, but because you've assumed more risk by putting in more equities in your portfolio. So he's very, very careful to say that one of the limitations of these surveys is that they don't really properly help you integrate how much risk are you taking to get that return.
Heidi, I want to come back to you. There's something you're talking about, extracts that you're getting from this investment or this survey. And one of the things they said was that if you're looking at a performance of a value fund, managers should be compared against a value benchmark. What does that mean exactly?
Well, I think all of this is speaking to the same kind of idea that Anne was speaking to, and that is in a survey, you've got to be ranked amongst a fair competitive field. The more specifically you're ranked, of course, the less interesting the survey is, because you'll have smaller groups, but the more broadly they define the categories, the more open it is to the gaming, to the nature of which Anne was referring. There's an article that's very nicely put, which talks about the classification bias, as it's called. The whole notion of, if your fund is in the wrong category, how will you really be surveyed and assessed relative to that category? But furthermore, if almost all the funds are in the wrong category, you end up with this classification bias, which can really throw your assessment of how funds are performing relative to their benchmark. The issue of a benchmark is, of course, far more important for the investor to discuss with their own fund manager. That's really much more important as part of an investment mandate, and should be given much more careful consideration, be much more tailored to what the investment style and what their client is needing. But in a survey, you need a group. You have to be ranked in a group, and so you need a group, a category, and that implies a certain benchmark.
But that same author, that was Ron Sears, describes why it is that a peer group benchmark, in other words, beating everybody else against the measure, that sort of median manager return in that space, is a completely bogus benchmark. So that is not the correct benchmark. And the reason why is because all those managers may be taking completely different risks in those portfolios. So why they might have outperformed may not have anything to do with skill. It might have to do with the amount of risk that was taken on in that fund, just by virtue of what the mandate of that fund is sometimes. It's not a manager decision sometimes. So peer group benchmarks in particular are hugely problematic. Everybody loves them in South Africa, and they tell you absolutely nothing about skill.
Well, ladies, thank you so much. I really wish we could continue this conversation further, but we have to stop it there. Maybe we can do another quarterly one where we look at these particular funds, what they did last time and what they're doing right now. Thank you so much to Anne Cabot-Alletzhauser, head of the Alexander Forbes Research Institute, and over in Cape Town, Heidi Raubenheimer from the University of Stellenbosch Business School, and of course, Finweek editor Jana Murray.